40 years here, in the Senate, that is. I want to go back to an article that was published in the New York Times before I was born on March 11, 1982. It states, the impact for cities along the border has been devastating and will continue to be so for the near future. Those words were spoken by Senator Keith Langseth, who's a member of the DFL here in Minnesota. For the last 3 decades, we've seen articles like this consistently, all the way up until Sunday, when Mike McFeely, a local, we'll argue, moderate, wrote an article including a statistic concerning 70% of people that work on the Fargo side of the river. Now that wouldn't be a big deal, except it's not just jobs I'm concerned about. The reason why I'm actually running here is I want to talk about flood mitigation. I want to talk about taxes, which has increased during my opponent's terms in the legislature by almost 250%. That's a statistic I can quantify. Healthcare costs over the last 4 years have doubled. Each and every one of you know that because you pay premiums and deductibles. Every secondary school, with the exception of one district, and I compliment you on your district not having failed, has four scores. They've actually been declining over the last 4 years compared to the state average. And you've had no infrastructure improvements. So I'm here to talk about solutions. I hope you ask good questions. I hope they're great because I came here to debate.
Thank you. And Paul, your opening statement.
Well, thank you very much, Rachel, and thank the League of Women Voters and the library here in Moorhead for hosting this. And is there a librarian here? Can I talk loud? We are in a library, so I'm just wondering if I can do that, but I will. First of all, I'd like to say my wife, Colleen, and daughter, Ashley, is here. Ashley is a teacher at Dilworth Windham Felton, 2nd grade teacher. And, you know, the most important and enjoyable thing I do is to get out and talk with people as I go door to door. And with that, I have a 5-point plan, priorities for the future for rural Minnesota called Putting Rural Minnesota First. And it's to improve upon the good quality of life we have here in rural Minnesota. It involves first keeping our communities safe from crime and terrorism. It is number 2, investing in education and good paying jobs in rural Minnesota. 3, it's cutting taxes for our senior citizens, our farmers, our families, and small businesses. It's 4, assuring that every person in this state has affordable and dependable and high quality health care. And the fifth point of the plan is that we provide a good quality of life and services for our senior citizens and our veterans. And if we can do that, and I have a detailed plan, I hope I have a chance to talk about that tonight, we move into the future. So I want to talk about the future tonight and the future of this great area and how we can make it better. But my time is up, but thank you all for being here tonight. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And Ben, your opening statement.
Good evening. Thank you, Rachel and League of Women Voters, and thank you all for coming here and the people watching on the Community Access Channel. My name is Ben Grimsley. I'm a 6th generation resident of Detroit Lakes and business owner. I'm a financial planner and help families plan their financial future, and I'm also a county commissioner. So I've worked firsthand in government, and we're the arm of the state, so we take care of all kinds of things that the state legislates. And we've done a good job of holding taxes there and improving our infrastructure. That's something I want to work on here. But what I'm most excited about is reforming our welfare system so that people have an opportunity to climb out of poverty and start paying taxes. And I hope there's a question about that in the future, but it's really just providing so people don't fall off their benefits because they make an extra $200 a year. I'd like to see them more incrementally reduced. I'd also like to see if relatives or families know that a friend or maybe their nephew is abusing the welfare system, that they can report that to the county, and that we can have a system for doing some drug testing. So I look forward to speaking tonight, and I thank you all for being here.
Thank you. And Ben Lean, your opening statement.
Thank you, Rachel. My name is Ben Lean. I'm the state representative for District 4A here at Moorhead and then Oakport Township just to the north of us. And I do want to thank the League of Women Voters for again hosting this forum tonight in the Moorhead Public Library. And I really appreciate what the League has been doing as long as I've been in the legislature here. Really engaging the community and engaging people in our democratic process and really making people cognizant of the fact that these elections matter and these policies matter. And so really I just want to
express my appreciation for that. If reelected to the legislature, I'm going to go down there and I'm going to fight for, well, first and foremost, our border city program, really making that stronger. I think we can do that by making that a permanently funded program in the state budget. Also, we have railroad infrastructure, which everybody knows well. Knows well the issues that causes, not just for traffic throughout the community, but also for public safety. And I really think that if we can get some real strong improvements to railroad infrastructure and the underpasses, I think that'll really prepare Moorhead for future growth now that we've got a lot of the buyouts and the levees along the Red River taken care of for both Moorhead and Oakport. I think the underpasses are really the next phase of improved infrastructure for future growth of the city. I'm sure we'll be able to talk more statewide issues here as we move forward, but thank you all for coming tonight.
Thank you. Jordan, your opening statement.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you all for coming here tonight. I'd like to express my gratitude to the League and the library as well for hosting us. My name is Jordan Idso. I am the Republican candidate for Minnesota House District 4. I've lived in Moorhead the majority of my life. I went through the school system here. I graduated from Moorhead High in 2014. I really couldn't picture myself living anywhere else. I had an interest in politics. It started at a very young age. And recently the reason I'm here tonight is because I was starting to look for ways to get active because I wanted to make a difference in my community. So I started getting involved with the local party, and I went to the caucus to vote, and I ended up getting elected as a delegate to the county convention, and from there an alternate to the congressional district and the state conventions. And one night, I was sitting at my computer, and my inbox was filling up very fast. They were saying, we don't have anybody running for the legislature this session. What are we going to do? And I expressed my interest in doing so because I felt I would be very remiss if I did not do so, because I feel like I can be a difference maker for this community when it hasn't had in very many years. So thanks again for being here, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. And now we will start with our first question from the audience. And James, we will start with this one. And it is, as we know, early childhood education is very important to the success of lifelong learners. How do you plan to support early childhood education?
Hi, I'm one of few Republicans in the state that actually takes a major interest in funding the pre-K program. I deviate primarily from my party for this reason. I've stated this. I've actually determined ways to pay for it as well. One area I'd like to focus on, not just on pre-K, but is STEM. When you look at K through 12 and you look at our undergraduates and graduates, I find that the United States ranks probably in the mid-30th percentile when it comes to industrialized nations, and I feel like it's a failure of our nationwide school system to produce engineers, doctors, etc. I feel like it starts before kindergarten, and there are methods to pay for it today in the budget without having to raise taxes. We can start with, for example, a good pre-K program could be funded utilizing automation of jobs as people attrit, as they retire, etc. I think through good governance, we can find the money. We can adequately fund pre-kindergarten programs, K through 12 programs, and then move up through the university system to ensure that we're ready as a region, as a state, and as a country to meet global challenges as they pertain to STEM programs.
Thank you. Paul.
Well, pre-K education is going to be the key if we're going to get to the world's best workforce. If we're going to have an economy second to none in the world, we have to start early, because the earlier you start, the better you can close the achievement gap. And there was a person from the Minnesota Federal Reserve Bank who said that if we could close the achievement gap in Minnesota, and that's the difference between basically students not in poverty and students in poverty, and pre-K has a big thing to do with that. If you could close that achievement gap within 15 years, you would increase our gross domestic product here in Minnesota by 2 to 5%. And even at 2%, that would be increasing our economy by $5 billion a year. Think about that. That'd be like building 5 Viking stadiums a year of increased economic activity if you could close the achievement gap. That's when you start early on, close the achievement gap, you give those kids, you get them to the starting line in kindergarten all at the same time. If you can do that, you're going to be successful. You can't try to close the achievement gap afterwards. It costs way too much.
Thank you. And Ben?
Well, I didn't hear our legislators mention how they're going to fund early childhood education sustainably for the long haul, and I don't believe that government is the answer to all our questions in life, and I don't think that leaving your children at a school with with a bunch of other kids all day is necessarily the way forward for Minnesota. I'm more interested in seeing us reinvest in our infrastructure, and the House Republicans had a plan that invested $7 billion in our infrastructure without raising taxes that my opponent voted against, and those are the kind of things that I'd like to get to tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ben?
Well, I think it's really unfortunate that over the last couple of years in the legislature, so much of the debate has been about early childhood education. So much of the debate has been based on the merits. Is this the worthy endeavor of public resources, public dollars? And as Representative Marquardt has laid out, that's going to, if we can close that achievement gap, that's going to do wonders for our state's economy. And so I think what we really do need to be talking about is how are we going to do this? And I know the debate seems to be between through the public school districts or through the child care vouchers, the child care daycare vouchers for the parent-aware child care facilities. But I think we need to approach this with everything on the table. We need to approach it with the vouchers, parent-aware vouchers, certainly for school districts that don't have access to adequate child care facilities. We do need to be providing some funding for the school districts to do this, but also we need to be thinking about Head Start, because there are a lot of families, a lot of kids that have, Head Start has been successful. They are success stories of that program. So I think more of it needs to be about how are we going to do this with everything on the table versus are the merits of this worthy.
Thank you. And Jordan?
Due to the massive bureaucracy that is the state of Minnesota, I would not trust it with pre-K programs. I don't. It is proven that it's been unable to sustain these programs, that many children and many families have been let down because of it. I think it would be wisest if someone was to pursue this route, to pursue private options in regards to this, just simply because the state cannot handle the massive amount of people who need this. So when you expand these things into the private sector, you are providing families not only with more options, but with cheaper options in order to get their children the education they need early on. But I've heard it argued that in order to build, a strong, educated Minnesota, it needs to start early on. I don't think that's necessarily the case. It starts more towards the middle, in middle school and high school. That is where we need to ramp up our efforts, and I think that's where our focus should be.
Thank you. And the final answer for this question, Kent.
Actually, studies indicate that there's no better investment. Studies indicate that there's no better investment we could make than in early childhood programs. Art Rolnick had led a study. He's from the Federal Reserve Bank. That's not considered to be a liberal organization, but they've come to the conclusion in the study that they did that this was the best investment we could make as far as the return on our dollars. So studies have indicated that this is a major important investment for our state and its future success. And I think it's important to note that we did start moving in this direction. We now have all-day, everyday kindergarten in the state of Minnesota because of the efforts that we have made, myself along with Representative Marquardt and Representative Lean. We understand the importance that these programs have for our children and for our state's future. So I think that we've been moving in that direction. I think we need to continue moving in that direction. We can't afford to be leaving anyone behind now when we have baby boomers that are leaving the workforce in droves. We have major workforce shortages that we're facing, and if we're going to maintain the high quality of life we've come to enjoy and expect, we're going to have to make sure we're educating all our children to the fullest extent possible. And the last thing I want to mention is that we've been kind of pushing back from elementary school backwards. Someone said maybe we should start really at the beginning, and we need to also be looking at prenatal care and looking at making sure that those children have the resources they need to be successful from the very start.
Thank you. And the next question we'll start with Paul, and that will be, please talk about the newly proposed commission to determine legislative wages and how this will differ from what is currently used, and if you are for or against this proposal.
I think the question is referring to the constitutional amendment that Senator Eakin authored. And, well, first of all, I have to say that in all the years I was mayor and now as a legislator, I've never had a pay raise. And so it's a non-issue for me, first of all. Let's take the legislature out of it. We can see where it can be a big political football. And what this would do, and what Senator Eakin is devising here, is an independent, total different commission that would decide and look at wages for legislators. And so I don't think legislators should be making that call. I think it's a self-conflict. And so by having something totally separate, I think it's the way to go. And hopefully that would take it, you know, I mean, I don't know when the last time there was a pay raise. I think it was 1998 or 1999. And, you know, the salary is $31,000 a year, not $100,000 a year. It's $31,000 a year, and the rest are some out-of-pocket expenses. So let's take the politics out of this and have this independent commission just decide.
Thank you. And Ben?
Thank you. Well, I will be voting against the amendment. I think that would be like having a separate board set the pay for me as a county commissioner, and I don't think that's necessary. I answer to the people. And maybe the pay should be based on what gets done at the end of the session, and maybe we would get a lot more done. I don't know if we could add that in on the ballot now, but I know that my opponent, we've had 4 years ago, there was, I think it was about 4 years ago, a constitutional amendment question on the ballot that I believe our District 4B went 56% one way, and our legislator voted the other way that next session. So I would follow my district's wishes on this, regardless of which way it goes. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ben?
Well, I agree with Representative Marco. I really think this issue should be completely removed from the legislature. For us to be setting our own pay, I think it's a direct conflict of interest. I mean, there's no way getting around that. So what this new citizen commission would be, and we'll all have a chance to vote on this here in November, would basically be just that, a citizen commission that's going to get together and decide what legislative pay should be. Could stay the same, could go up, could go down. And I really think that's the way to handle this. I know it has to be a constitutional amendment because it's in, of course, the state constitution. And so really, I think that authority to set legislative pay should be removed from the legislature and put in the hands of the Citizen Commission.
Thank you. And Jordan?
This concept is that, for me, it's rather simple. I'm actually all for the idea of an independent commission to set legislative pay, and my reasoning for this is the average worker doesn't get to set their own pay, you know. So why should I, as a legislator, why should I have that right when very few other people do? And if a legislator gets to raise their own pay, you know, when they do it is very much a conflict of interest, because who in their right mind wouldn't vote for a pay increase?
Thank you. And Kent?
Thank you. I did author this amendment, and I've been trying to push for this for over a decade because it is a conflict of interest, as Representative as candidate Ipso said, that's the reason that I was introducing it. People of Minnesota did not send us to St. Paul to argue about our pay. They sent us to St. Paul to discuss the issues that concern them and the important issues facing us as a state. It really is unseemly. It is a clear and glaring conflict of interest that is built within our Constitution and requires a constitutional amendment in order to change. And so for that reason, I am obviously supporting this amendment and promoting it. We need to make sure that we focus on the people's business, not on our pay. And this is a truly independent and objective citizens council that's being set up. It has no connections to the government because it's not even appointed by the legislature. It's appointed by the governor and the chief justice, the other two branches, and it has no legislators serving on it, no former legislators serving on it, no spouses of legislators serving on it, no staff from the legislature serving on it, no lobbyists from the legislature serving on it, no judges or former judges or governors or former governors. We've removed every possible conflict of interest there could possibly be from this process.
Thank you. And the final answer for this question is James.
So this has been a central tenet of my opponent's campaign. I've actually been attacked no less than a dozen times in the newspaper and on the radio as a liar. I'm kind of tired of these attack ads, and I wish you'd denounce them, Ken. If you look at the Minnesota Post and the Star Tribune, contrary to Mr. Markwart's $100,000 comment, if you look at wages, per diems, the $18,000 tax-free housing allowance, healthcare, retired compensation, it actually does exceed $100,000. I would ensure you to look at it yourself, research it, and look at the independent articles that have been conducted down in St. Paul. It's time to take a stand. These guys already voted no. It's been voted down several times, so what they did was they created a smokescreen for real issues so they can take it out of their hands. It's the legislator's responsibility to vote up or down, and it's been voted down. To put it in a separate commission is simply a smokescreen, and I don't know why you want to hide your votes. Let's pay teachers, cops, firefighters, cafeteria workers, librarians, anybody, people that are actually getting stuff done first before we talk about legislators, because nothing's been getting done down there. Do you have an underpass you've been talking about for 20 years? You have healthcare that's doubled in the last 4 years. You have tax increases. Nobody's working these issues. Instead, we're focused on the commission to set legislative pay, and then you go and attack people because we cited fact through the Minnesota Post and the Star Tribune. I think people need to do the research before they make a decision, and I'll be voting against it.
Thank you. And the next question, we'll start with Ben Grimsley. And that is, what are your plans to make healthcare more affordable?
Thank you. I feel that I'm the most qualified person at the table in order to make health insurance more affordable. I sold health insurance prior to the Affordable Care Act and still do, so I've seen the changes and I've seen the premium increases and I've talked to clients through how that's affecting them. And the few of the things that we can do is we can remove the tax that goes to MNsure on everybody's policies. When your policy premiums go up, it actually creates more tax. The state spent over $400 million, and that's a huge number on MNsure, which is failing the residents. I would reduce the over 40 mandates that we have in addition to the Affordable Care Act, and to be honest, I would scrap it and go to the national system, which it's a marketplace, to electronically search for policies. The other thing I'd like to do is just ask for a waiver. Some states have done that because in Minnesota we always had a pretty good health insurance program. We actually had a program. I'm sure my opponent would know that if you couldn't purchase health insurance because you were uninsurable, Minnesota did have a program that you go kind of on the Minnesota care system. So there's a lot we could do and more to talk about, but I'm out of time. Thanks.
Thank you. And Ben Lee.
I think one thing we can certainly do is take a look at combining the individual insurance pool with the small group insurance pool, basically the small employer insurance pool. Right now those are two separate pools, and the biggest increases we're seeing is in that individual pool. And I think it's because when the ACA went into effect and insurers were no longer able to deny access or deny coverage to people, they underestimated how much it was going to cost, and so they had a lot of losses. So they're now trying to recoup a lot of those losses, and that's why so many of the premiums on the individual market are going up so high. So I think that's one thing we can do with the existing infrastructure we have is combine these two pools. I mean, that's the basis of insurance. That's how it works. A larger pool, you spread the costs out. But I also think we should be looking at what a public option would look like for Minnesota. And candidate Grimsley, Commissioner Grimsley is right. In 2017, we'll be able to apply for a waiver from the ACA. Granted, we're able to cover as many people, comparable rates, and so I think that is something we should also be looking at.
Thank you. And Jordan?
Now, I'm surprised that people still debate whether or not the ACA was a disaster, and I very much think that it is. Because when it came into effect, we were all, promised that we wouldn't be denied insurance, and it's true that today more people are covered than ever, but you have to look at why they're covered. It's a mandate, they have to, otherwise, they get fined to no end if they don't get covered, so the whole thing is kind of a facade. If you want to improve the health insurance system as it exists today, with all of its roadblocks as set by the federal government and the state, we need to take advantage of the free market as much as we possibly can, in order to circumvent these roadblocks. Because when people have options other than public, we need private options and multiple private options in order to get healthcare costs back down. And what the ACA did, it took away these options because it took an already over-regulated market and put more regulations on it and proceeded to make everything more expensive. The goal of it of the ACA was to drive down costs for everybody, but the only thing to ever decrease as a result of the ACA was the rate at which insurance premiums increase, and we now know obviously that is no longer the case, and I would second that.
Thank you. And Kent?
Well, I think that the ACA had too much influence from the insurance companies when it was being written, which is one of the reasons that it hasn't accomplished the goal of restraining the increasing costs that we've seen in healthcare. And those costs were increasing prior to the ACA. They continue to increase. Of course, there's good things about the ACA in that they don't allow people to be denied coverage because of pre-existing conditions, but that means there's going to be more people with pre-existing conditions and need coverage. That, of course, places pressure on the cost of increase. But I think that we need to do something more along the lines of expanding Medicare, which has been a very efficiently run, successful program here in this country. I also think as far as the Blue Cross Blue Shield pulling out of the individual market, we should be expanding Minnesota Care at the state level to ensure that those who are losing those options and are seeing their costs increase skyrocketing, that they'll have an option to buy into that program, which is subsidized health insurance from the state. I also think that we need to have more control over what's happening with the pharmaceutical companies. We want to make sure the University of Minnesota is doing the research and development necessary to find cures for illnesses, not just more expensive treatments of those illnesses. And I think that we also need to do more at the state level to encourage prevention, things like the statewide health improvement program, which has been so successful at ensuring and getting young people on the right path to a successful lifestyle so they don't incur all the costs associated with health problems.
Thank you. And James?
Minnesota is one of 9 states with a state exchange, so I feel like we need to open it up to the national market to encourage choice and competition. Right now in Minnesota, here in 2017, we'll be down to 2. That's a monopoly, bottom line. I think if we offered tax incentives to healthy people, they discontinue taking the tax, $2,500 tax hit, and then they would jump into the pool, and then it would drive prices down. Because right now you have mostly unhealthy people that have joined the pool. That's what's contributed to skyrocketing rates. Combining the tax incentives with the opening to the national market, I think you would see a drastic decline, not the 40 and 67% proposals we're seeing for 2017. This is simple supply and demand, and the public option would help because we're not heartless people, and we want to ensure that people that need health care get health care. People are broke. If you have to pay for your health insurance premiums, you know that. You're sitting here and you know that. Your deductibles have gone up for families up to $10,000 to $12,000. You're paying $1,200, $1,300 a month in addition to that, and it's simply unfair, and a lot of it was self-created by the state and by the federal government. I just want to point out MNsure did cost $400 million. Do you want to know what you get for $400 million? You get a year of pre-K practically throughout the state. You get 13 underpasses here in Moorhead, and you get tax cuts for small and middle income earners plus small businesses throughout the state. So put that into perspective. Put that waste into perspective and understand what this government has done. and think about how we can think in the future and do better for our constituents.
Thank you. And the final answer for this question, Paul.
Thank you. Well, too many people are paying way too much for premiums, and I've gone out and about and talked to a lot of people, and healthcare costs are way too high, and it's really hitting those in the individual plans. It's about 5% of our policyholders, about 300,000 people around the state, and about a quarter, about 75,000 can get into the MNsure exchange. And so what we need to do is stabilize the individual rate increases. We need to work on how we can lower prescription drugs. One of the benefits of the MNsure exchange is that you can qualify for a federal tax credit, all the way up to $47,000 income for a single or up to $97,000 income for a family of four. I also think the state should have a tax credit to help buy down people's premiums, especially when it goes over a certain percent of a person's income. So those are some of the things I think we can do, but there's no quick fixes. And a lot of folks want to continue to talk about all the problems without really looking at concrete solutions that's going to help people. But the key is we have to make sure, and as part of my plan, putting rural Minnesota first, one of the 5 points, we have to make sure everyone, right now we're down to 4.3% uninsured rate, one of the lowest in the nation. That part is good, but we got to make sure everyone has affordable health care.
Thank you. And the next question, we'll start with Ben Lean. And I have a couple of questions that I'm going to try to combine, but this one is, what plans do you have to increase transportation and infrastructure funding, and how would you pay for these projects? And then also there's a question that deals with having the Department of Transportation having control over determining what projects are made, and how do we feel about that?
Well, in 2014, the governor and all members of the House campaigned on transportation. We need to get something long-term, comprehensive done, yet nothing got done. And, it's unacceptable. And I think the problem is because you had two sides that saw the problem, but were they weren't willing to give. They were just digging their heels in and not willing to give. And ultimately, a solution to this issue is going to take compromise. And I think it's going to take new revenue. I think it's going to take, we can use some existing revenue. I don't think we should be rating surplus dollars because I think we need to be saving some for some tax cuts and everything. But we can also use some bonding dollars. And I think when you had the governor, the speaker, and the Senate Majority Leader at the end of the session this year coming around to the idea of increased tab fees, that tells me that everybody agrees, yeah, it's going to take revenue. Now the question I think is, do we want to go toward a gas tax, which is advantageous for greater Minnesota? Here in Moorhead, we would not see an increase. There's something called a MO zone, which impacts Minnesota, North Dakota, Wisconsin, all the borders. Plus, if you're talking about tab fees, you're going to have your little old lady who's maybe going to go to the grocery store once a week paying just as much in new transportation costs as somebody who drives 50, 100 miles for work every week. So, yeah.
Thank you. Jordan.
I disagree entirely with my opponent's proposition. I don't believe we need to increase any taxes, any fees, anywhere in order to pay for this. I think we could take advantage of our own sales tax dollars and put that towards our transportation needs. We need to dedicate our existing funds. There's no need to keep setting. But last session, the legislature passed Minnesota's the highest budget Minnesota has ever had. And how do you think they're going to fund these things? They're through ever increasing taxes. It doesn't stop. It's a vicious, self-fulfilling cycle, and it needs to be broken. So we need to start making choices and prioritizing our certain projects based on our needs at the present time. I don't think tax increases or increases of tab fees or what have you is the right way to go around it. We need to make choices. Everywhere working people, they have to make choices in their daily lives as far as their financials go. The state should do the same.
Thank you. Kent.
Well, I think Representative Lean had laid it out, I think, pretty well as far as the advantages that the gas tax has as an option. Everybody in the legislature agrees that we need to raise significantly more revenue for roads and bridges. The only question is how to do it. And there's no question as to which way is the best for our area as far as what we get back in return for what we pay in. We get back much more than what we pay in gas tax revenue. In other words, we're leveraging money from the Twin Cities to pull into our roads and bridges out here. That's a good deal for us. That formula was written back at a time when rural Minnesota had a much better balance in the legislature. That's why we've got such a good formula that we need to protect and keep going here. That gas tax revenue is constitutionally dedicated. It can be used for no other purposes. It all goes into roads and bridges only. And again, it works through that formula. And Representative Lean mentioned the Moe zone. In Moorhead and Dilworth, it also includes Dilworth, they would not see 1 cent of increase in the gas tax, no matter how much it's raised at the state level, because they're protected as border cities from any further increase in the gas tax, which means we get all the benefits from the increase, but pay none of the costs in Moorhead and Dilworth, which is more than half of my district. It's all of Representative Lean's. And also, again, it's all constitutionally dedicated, and also farm fuel is also exempt from the gas tax. That's our largest industry here, the only industry that I'm aware of that is exempt from the gas tax. So it's good for our area.
Thank you. And James?
So far, we're applying 20th century solutions to 21st century problems. All I've heard are fees and taxes. Look at PetroServe. They left this area and they moved over to Fargo as a result. They're worried about losing gas stations, independent owners, right outside of this border city area, which does impact everybody here. Study after study shows that there's an exodus of capital and jobs as a result of discussing more fees and taxes, and we have to stop. I proposed for transportation funding a massive freeze 5, 6, 7 plan. Since my opponent was elected, the budget was $17 billion, it's now $43 billion. That's an increase of 250%. I always ask people, do you feel like you get 250% more services? And the answer is no, you don't. If you freeze the budget for 5 years, that'll collect $22 billion. You can take 5 of that, and you can apply it to roads and bridges throughout the state. You can take 6 of that, and you can apply it to capital improvements like wastewater and other antiquated infrastructure in the state that's going to require it. Then you can take the other 7 and apply it to small business and then small, or rather low and middle income earner tax credits throughout the state. You'd have $4 billion in contingency for a rainy day in the event there was a problem. So you're freezing taxes at the current rate, you're freezing revenue, you're giving the money back into a strategic road and bridge plan, and you're also giving money back to regions such as this that need it because we can't compete against Fargo and South Dakota if you're further south in the state. So as a result, freeze 5, 6, 7, remember it, force legislators to do their job and work within the $43 billion that they have every year through committees and through metrics, and that's what I'd like to do.
Thank you. And Paul?
Well, the second point of my putting rural Minnesota first priority plan for this year is creating new jobs out in rural Minnesota, and transportation is a big part of that. And I think we could do $100 million in the corridors of commerce. Those are all roadways needed in rural Minnesota. $25 million that would go to cities under 5,000 that don't fall under the formula. That should be done right now to help create jobs. But on the longer picture, everyone agrees it would take about $600 million of new funding a year to fund what we need to do just to maintain things in the next 10 years. 50% of our roads are 50 years of age or older, and 40% of our bridges are 40 years or older. Our infrastructure, which our parents and grandparents set up years ago, is crumbling. We need to do something. I am willing to compromise. The one solution the Republicans brought up, which is almost taking almost all the money out of the general fund, which is pre-K education. I don't like that idea, but I would do it. I would do that as part of an overall mix. But what we have is too many people who are not willing to go beyond the partisan lines. Now I want to mention right now that the Pioneer Press did a study of our votes and found out that I was one of only 3 legislators in the House of Representatives of 134 that said was willing to work and had a consistent record of working with both parties. That's what you need is a bipartisan approach. Compromise is doing some things you don't want to do, but we need to move the state forward on this transportation deal.
Thank you. And final answer for this question, Ben Grimsley.
Thank you, Rachel. I think that's a very important question to the whole state. And like I say, the House Republicans put a plan together that invested $7 billion over the next several years. We had a $1.8 billion surplus this past biennium. And funding roads and bridges is constitutionally described as part of state government's duties, and I don't know why we wouldn't take money out of the general fund to fund that. But I think a gas tax increase that my opponent is very supportive of would be devastating to our area. Most people that live in Sabin or Linden, they might live in Hewlin or Hitterdall or Gary or Hendrup. They usually drive into the Fargo-Moorhead area probably at least once a week, once every couple weeks. And the tax that the DFL proposed would have put a 21.5 cent, disadvantage from Minnesota to the prices in Fargo. And so I'm tired of seeing our convenience stores decimated in our side of the river, and really just seeing communities struggle to compete with the business-friendly Dakotas. And I think this question is central to that. Thank you.
Thank you. And our next question, we'll start with Jordan, and that is, what would you do to help find affordable housing for all Minnesota residents?
Well, as far as the affordable housing issue goes, you need to look into what makes housing so expensive. It's the regulatory environment in which we live. You need to deregulate all these industries, everything that goes into building a house. The state mandates, certain safety precautions, certain things go into building these structures, and as a result, it makes them more expensive. And the state does this in the name of safety, but at the same time, it puts people at a disadvantage. The state's policies end up discouraging home ownership, so they end up shooting themselves in the foot trying to pursue one goal, and at the same time they're screwing themselves over when it comes to another.
Thank you. And Kent.
Well, and this is a huge issue for our area. Affordable housing is so important to the stability of families in our area and to the businesses in our area. We depend on a workforce that has the homes necessary for them to live in. So we need to provide grants to ensure that we're incentivizing the building of lower cost affordable housing in our area. I think we also need to make sure that for those who are homeless, there's stable homes that are provided, apartments that are provided, that ensures that people, especially those with children, have the stability necessary to provide a good environment for their children. And that's really the key to any economic success for families, is to first of all have a stable, safe environment to live in. And so that's very important. And then just one last thing I was going to mention, I didn't get to finish on as far as the transportation piece. If you're taking money out of the general fund, you are taking money away from things like nursing homes and schools, and I don't want to be hitting roads and bridges against people. Now, with that being said, I am willing to compromise and accept as part of the deal some money out of the general fund, but I do think that we need to try to promote that revenue source which is most beneficial to our area. But compromise is key to getting things done, so I'm willing to look at anything.
Thank you. And James.
Sorry, these are impromptu, so I speak from the heart. So I sit on an HRA board up in Norman County, and incentives are great. I think that the state supports it adequately at this time, and I think cities can do a lot more through tax increment financing. I've noticed we can build subdivisions and offer property tax incentives to owners who can then rent it to low-income families, or even medium income, because I think the cutoff's like $85,000 per family, so that's doing well. The issue is we're playing chess, or we're playing checkers, not chess, and we need to look at the fundamental problem as to why housing, or the costs associated with housing, aren't priced well. So, for example, here in Moorhead, Mike McFeely wrote an article on Sunday. 60% of the people that earn paychecks here earn their paychecks in Fargo. 30% either work for Cass County or the city of Moorhead. That means only 10% work for private industry here in Moorhead. So what does that say? That means your business community has been decimated. That means if you had more businesses here due to business-friendly policies, you'd have more money going to St. Paul through business revenue, right? That revenue would then go back to cities in the form of LGA. If it went back to cities in the form of LGA, the cities can then lower your property taxes. So if you have tax increment financing, you have lower property taxes, and you have a number of other benefits, such as good jobs, what you'll find is people won't struggle as hard to find adequate affordable housing because the conditions are in place so that everybody benefits as opposed to just a select few.
Thank you. And Paul.
No, I agree. I mean, affordable housing is a key, and, you know, you look at the issue of homelessness for one, and what, 25% of our homeless are veterans. There should not be a single homeless veteran in Minnesota, especially when the reason why their physical and mental disability, for the reason they're homeless, was caused probably from the service they provided to us. It's not right that they're homeless. Another area also, maybe a little different from affordable housing, is workforce housing. In rural Minnesota, we've got a number of cities that have big businesses, but because of the prices and so forth, they can't find housing for the workers, and they're literally shipping them in from 50, 60 miles away, or they don't get the workers at all, which impacts the economy in this area. So it's affordable housing, it's homeless, it's workforce housing, all of those things that if you can deal with that concern, you're going to improve the economy and the quality of life for folks, and improve the educational level for everyone, especially if you don't have children who come to the school trying to be ready to learn from a homeless situation.
Thank you. Ben?
Thank you. Well, I just want to point out that my opponent did vote against $16 million in additional funding for a veterans home, so we talked about that last week. You know, I don't want to sound like a broken drum, but you can see that there's no trouble building apartments in Fargo, West Fargo, South Fargo. They're going up, it's pretty easy. And yes, we desperately need them on this side of the river. We need them in Detroit Lakes. We need workers to support our industries. But when you have the work that you need and you have the option of working in North Dakota, you're going to choose that. And we have people up here, my opponent's asking for a 17th and 18th a year. You know, and we're talking about how to get transportation funding in 4B. We're talking about how to put up housing. And I think you just really got to ask yourself, does somebody deserve an 8th term? We have ideas. There's been bills, if you follow the legislature, on how to do this, but we're going to continue to see our businesses and investment go on the other side of the river. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ben?
I think the real crux of this issue comes down to the number of available units, and this is a problem that we're seeing on both sides of the river. Talk about workforce housing. Various groups in Fargo-Moorhead have all gotten together and pointed out a shortage of workers in the area, and housing is a big part of that. And that's a problem all around the state. Shortage of workforce housing, shortage of workers. So I think, at least in Moorhead, what we can do, and I know the twin homes were a big part of Moorhead's residential growth over the last 5 to 10 years, and something that we need to do that I certainly support is removing a mandate that there are fire sprinklers in these twin homes. You know, I think that's something we need to take away. That's going to add to the cost of housing, and a lot of these people are first-time home buyers, and I myself bought a home just last year, so I know the shortage of affordable units to buy, you know, how that's out there. Now, the second piece of this, I think, is rental housing. And I've been very supportive, very proud to support initiatives passed through a bonding bill, through a capital investment bill every year, to put dollars into supportive housing across the state. And Senator Eakin is absolutely right. That's the number one part of stability for people to go out and get a job, get an education, is have that safe roof over their head.
Thank you, and I think we have time for one more question. And we're going to start with you, Kent, for this one. And this is your views on the flood mitigation plan and your feelings for the area, and kind of condensing a few questions, but for flood control.
Well, Representative Lean and Representative Marquardt and I have worked diligently to finish the flood mitigation projects in our area of the state, and we'll continue to do so. For there's a bonding project for Halstead that's in the bonding bill that we passed, but didn't make it across the finish line at the very end. We'll continue working on that. As far as the diversion issue, that's one that we are not dealing with at the state level yet at this point in time, at least not in the legislature. The DNR is still finishing up with their permitting process, and once that's completed, then we'll see where to go from there. But obviously, we need to fight for long-term permanent flood protection for the Moorhead area and for our whole area in western Minnesota. We want to make sure that whatever flood projects are put in place are going to be in the best interests of the people on our side of the river, and that whatever we're paying for such projects are fair, in the price that we pay, so that we're not paying more than our fair share. We pay based on what benefits are being derived from the project that's being implemented. But we certainly need to fight for that long-term flood protection. Moorhead and Fargo are economic engines in our area. There's no doubt about that, and we need to protect that economic engine.
Thank you. And James?
So my opponent didn't answer the question. Moorhead, 7 council members in this community have studied it for 6 years. 3 years ago, they decided to proceed. 4 commissioners have studied it for several years. They decided to proceed. They've spent thousands of hours performing research and analysis concerning this very topic. Yet he mentioned 2 small towns in Norman County that have been waiting 20 years for flood mitigation. He didn't choose to address the Moorhead issue, and I wish leaders here weren't so silent. I know it's a tough issue to discuss, because half this community's for it, half's against it. I get that. But these guys gotta take a position. They should take a position tonight during their closing statement, because I feel like you, as residents of Moorhead, haven't received the leadership you deserve. When 7 council members, 4 commissioners have spent thousands of hours and 3 years ago decided to proceed, how many more years do you need than 6? It's the same thing with taxes, the underpass, agriculture, everything is unacceptable at this point. You need somebody that's gonna take a look at the hard issues, look at the impacts downriver. I get that there's some high hazard dam issues, but once you solve that, the reality is this. When 60% of this community is drawing its paychecks from Fargo, you should have an answer from both Moorhead reps tonight. Because this is your livelihoods that are on the line. Bottom line, pure, plain, and simple. And they've shirked it for 6 years. 6 years, and you deserve an answer, and I hate the fact that they won't do it.
Thank you. And Paul?
We certainly lead long-term flood protection for this area, but not at the expense of people upstream. You look at the plan that's out there right now. The plan, by design, will flood an area upstream that has never been flooded to protect valuable development areas south of Fargo that have always flooded. To me, that's not fair. And the mitigation project by the DNR is the permit. They said, they looked at the EIS and they said, you know, this is the one project that will do this. But it also said that we have big concerns about what is going to be the mitigation for the farmers and folks upstream. So I think there's ways in which you can do that. I think the diversion authority has been a little too heavy-handed and kind of started off on the wrong track. But they need a permit from the state of Minnesota. Minnesota is still saying there are several types of concerns we have before we move forward. And that's the way it should be to protect the minority, the folks upstream who haven't been flooded and now by design would be flooded with this project.
Thank you. And Ben?
The details of the project aren't something that I've followed as closely as other issues, regarding taxes and transportation and those kind of things. But whenever it does come to private property and government affecting that, I'm very careful, and I'm strongly on the side of property owners. But, regarding that, we do need to get a plan in place, and it's something, when elected, that I will look into with more detail. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ben?
Well, right now, the diversion project is, the DNR has completed their environmental impact study, and right now they're looking at whether or not they're going to issue a permit for the high hazard dam for the project. So that's just kind of where everything is at right now. Now, I personally don't feel that a legislator or the legislature should be interfering with an agency's permitting process, whether it be the polymet mining, whether it be the Sandpiper pipeline. I think that needs to be left up to the agency with their technical expertise, with their science, with their facts, and not political pressure from the legislature. So, with that being said, if the DNR does come forward and issues the permit for this project, being the Minnesota representative, yes, I will be fighting for dollars to finish that project. I think it will be a tough fight, but it's certainly a fight that I will take on. And my main concern with this is the future, and I've heard kind of conflicting information, but the future of flood insurance rates for people in Moorhead. I've heard FEMA's going to raise them, I've heard FEMA's not going to raise them. And so I guess my final answer is, if the DNR does issue the permits for this project. I'll fight for the money to do that.
Thank you. Any final answer from Jordan?
Well, I think if there's one thing we're all in agreement here, we do need permanent flood protection. I do think the diversion is a good way of accomplishing that. Now, given what the research I've seen, what I've looked into, the diversion as planned today, I think is a good way of going about protecting ourselves. Now, property owners, that was the thing that came up. Right now, people within, people within the current floodplain, they're mandated to buy flood insurance. That's a very costly proposition. But because of where they live, where they've chosen to live, they have to buy that flood insurance. Now, the Army Corps of Engineers is going to be raising the floodplain, and it's going to cut our protection in half. That's going to increase the range of that zone where these people are going to be forced to pay for this flood insurance. So that's going to double and triple the amount of people who are being forced to pay these things. So, in order to prevent, these obscene costs and these unnecessary, mandates on these people, I think the best way we can go about this is by pursuing the diversion project.
Thank you. And we are out of time for questions, and I do apologize. We have quite a few left that we did not get to, but perhaps the candidates are willing, they'd be willing to talk to you after or at some point be reachable. But now we will begin with 1 minute closing remarks, and we'll start with James.
First, I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. I forgot to mention, we're in this flight position because we can't grow here. 15 terms of incumbency plus 40 years of Senate representation from this area. That's why I read that New York Times article from before I was born. 40 years of promises, empty. That's why they're going in South Fargo, West Fargo, and they're not going here. That's why they need flood protection. Talked about a lot of issues tonight, and I appreciate it. Issues that impact us every day, but we have a path forward. We have a path forward for flood mitigation, tax relief, healthcare relief in terms of prices, education, infrastructure. I would encourage you to check me out on Facebook or our website because you'll see a lot of these proposals there. In addition, just remember as you leave here tonight, we have to play chess and not checkers because that's how we got in this position today. It's not about who we are. It's not a birthright position. It's a merit position. And I think it's important that we focus on who we can be as opposed to who we are and focus on generations 6 and 7 because we have an opportunity to restore that quality of life that we've come to enjoy. And if you have somebody that's really, truly bipartisan, really multi-partisan actually, I think we can get that done. I was proud to serve in the Army. I was proud to serve overseas. I was proud to serve veterans and a variety of other Homeland Security entities in DC before I came here. And I'm proud to serve the city of Ada, where I would encourage you all to come see what economic growth and development can truly look like for Moorhead, because we've done essentially a microcosm of what you can achieve here. I hope to visit you. I hope you come and see us up there, and I hope that we can grow together. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul.
Well, thank you very much for the League of Women Voters for sponsoring, everyone for coming out tonight. I care deeply about District 4B, the residents of Minnesota. And I also have a 5-point plan to move rural Minnesota forward. And my bipartisan record shows I can get that done. And you heard my opponent, if you listened carefully tonight, it was always Republicans against Democrats. That's not the way you get things done. Democrats and Republicans have to work together. I'm going to tell you again, go look at it, June 24th article, Pioneer Press, Minnesota starkly partisan. Look at it. I was one of 3 legislators out of 134 that had a consistent record of working with both parties. That's how you get things done. My 5-point plan, again, is making sure our communities are safe from crime and terrorism, investing in education and creating new jobs, cutting taxes, mainly property taxes, for senior citizens or farmers or families in our small businesses, assuring that everyone in this state has affordable and good, dependable health care. And finally, we have to make sure we're providing an excellent quality of life for our senior citizens and our veterans. And if I have the honor to be elected to another term, that's what I'm going to fight, put my heart and soul in those efforts for you, the residents of Fort Lee.
Thank you. And Ben.
Thank you, League of Women Voters. Rachel, you've done a good job, and thank you all for coming out. It's a better turnout than expected. You know, regarding some of the comments that my opponent made, if I sound partisan, it's because I think that our district's being left behind by having a representative who has gone after party leadership and voted with people in the Twin Cities and metro area as of late. I think somebody that's asking for a 17th and 18th year has to have a very high standard and has to have a lot of results that they can point to. And my litmus test as a politician is really, are people getting out of poverty? Is the general well-being in your district improving? Are you seeing communities grow? Because that gets people, more people paying taxes and having a better quality of life. And then I'd also like to see us reduce our marginal tax rate so we get closer to a flatter tax. Those are the things that I'm focused on. That's what I've done as a commissioner. We have what's called a tax extension ratio. You want to attract more businesses and really build your community so that the tax base gets spread around. It's the same concept, and I think that there's new people with new ideas that can accomplish that better. Thank you again.
Thank you, and Ben.
Thank you, Rachel, for moderating tonight. And again, the League of Women Voters, the Moorhead Public Library. I also want to thank the audio and video folks. I know you guys were out here last time around, so thank you for the work you're doing, putting this all on public access for people. And, you know, I'm going to continue the fight I fought over the last 4 years if I'm reelected to the legislature, and that's putting Moorhead, putting our community first, fighting for those border city dollars, whether it's reducing business property taxes to that disparity reduction credit, getting more funding for the enterprise zone, trying to make that a permanent program, shoring up the flood protection in Oakport and Moorhead, but then going, you know, further with the making sure we can get that underpass going. And you know, those are just very, very big projects for our region. And also, I sit on the higher education committee. That's something that I really value personally, higher education, having so many universities and colleges in Moorhead here. And we really need to do a better job of connecting higher education with the private sector and getting people, employers who need workers today for jobs available today, getting them into those jobs and getting those people, whether they be students starting out their academic career or, you know, somebody in their late 20s, early 30s going back to school for a new career, getting those people matched with the right employer, the right fit to get into those good paying jobs. So again, I'm Ben Lean, and I ask for your vote on November 8th. Thank you.
Thank you, and Jordan.
All right. Well, my final thanks to the League and yourself, Rachel, and of course the library for all hosting us today. And of course, I thank you for being here and listening to, you know, our ideas, you know, us speaking from our hearts and our consciences. But know this, I know what it takes to be a representative. It's in the job description is in the title. You represent your district. You've heard a lot of our ideas, our conscience. But the main goal, the main point of a representative is to be close to the people, their issues, and their hearts. That is why we exist. Not necessarily to vote our conscience, but to vote yours. The reason we exist is because we can't all fit in the House chambers. We are there to represent you. I've heard all this talking of bipartisanship. My one goal in going down to St. Paul is to stand up for my district and all the things that we need, our problems, to convey what we need in a manner that hasn't been done in so long. That is my goal in St. Paul. So again, I thank you all for being here, and I would appreciate your vote when the time comes.
Thank you. Final closing remark from Kent.
All right, well, thank you all for being here, and I just want to talk about key off of what Representative Marquardt was saying as far as the importance of bipartisanship. We are outnumbered in the legislature today as Greater Minnesota legislators. About 2/3 of the population is down in the cities, 2/3 of the legislators are down there in the Twin Cities, which means that we need to unite more now than ever before and set aside partisanship in order to do what's right for our region of the state. And I think we've got a great working team here. Representative Marquardt, Representative Lean, and myself have worked together very hard to accomplish a lot of very important goals for our area. And I think it's important to note that we have accomplished a lot. I mean, we balanced the budget. We've taken a deficit that was a decades-long deficit and turned that into a balanced budget so we have long-term stability now to make long-term decisions that's good for our region. We put more into our nursing homes, and in our greater Minnesota nursing homes in particular, we put a significant increase into nursing homes and their workers in providing stability and the care that's being provided for our some of our more vulnerable citizens and our seniors here. We've also completed the flood mitigation projects here for the dike projects for Moorhead and Gulfport Township. That's another accomplishment, and I can't miss talking about Senator Langseth, who's done so much for our area in that regard, and left his fingerprints all over this area with the bonding projects that he's put in. So lots of very important accomplishments. And the last thing I was going to mention, the underpass. We got a lot of good things in that bonding bill, including the underpass, which passed in both the House and the Senate. Unfortunately, because of another issue that didn't affect us directly, it didn't make it past the final finish line, but we're in a good position to get it done during the regular session. So thank you again for being here.
Thank you, and thank you candidates for being here. The video of this will be on the League of Women Voters of the Red River Valley's Facebook page, and you can also go there and see the same candidates discussing veterans issues. There's a video of that forum, and there's also a video of the Moorhead School Board Forum. And upcoming for October 13th, we will have the City Council Forum here at 7 o'clock.